In this video, we strive to remain spoiler-free, discussing only story and plot elements from the books relevant to what has occurred already on the show. When necessary, a spoiler warning with a countdown will be given.
Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca.
I'm Max.
And I'm the Geeky Hippie. Again, welcome back to What the Adaptation. We're the YouTube show that, well, you know what I'm about to say. We review adaptations from one form to another. Big surprise. Tonight, we come up to the penultimate episode of Season 1, The Expanse, originally on Sci-Fi Channel. Max, what can you tell us about this episode?
Oh, obviously, this is episode 9, Critical Mass, directed by Terry McDonough. Let's call him Donut.
Okay. I'll tell him you said that.
Yeah. Written by 3 people, Robin Veith, Dan Nowak, and Naren Shankar.
It's the showrunner.
I probably
Showrunner.
butchered their names, yep.
Naren, I
It's
think
the
it's
showrunner.
pronounced.
And it first aired February 2nd, 2016.
Wow.
That's a wild
Okay. Yeah.
This particular episode featured a flashback of Julie's origin story that kind of revealed her trajectory through the first season. Holden and Miller finally meet and team up to get to the bottom of a strange emergency situation happening in Eros.
There's another flashback.
Mhm.
At the beginning, our
That's
first scene
true.
of Miller is a flashback back to the series. Two of them. One, he's in Julie's apartment, and then he steals the necklace, sees the bird.
They're
Then he
both
does
in
a
Julie's apartment, yeah.
Yeah, but then he has a flashback to talking with Octavia and explaining to her about the animus going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just real brief, but there was second, maybe I guess you call it third flashback there. It really confused me when I first went to watch it. Like,
Didn't I just see that?
I mean, it's almost identical footage.
I think parts of it, yeah, definitely are.
Like when he gets the call from Semi, that's spot on, exact footage.
All right. So, what do you guys think of this episode? Usually you ask that, Glenn. I got it first.
I really liked the episode. It's not my favorite of the season, but I thought this was a really good episode, and with all that was going on, I forgive it for being a little sparse in a certain department, although the one thing I did find had a lot of examples.
Okay.
But I really enjoyed what happened, and a spoiler for a minute from now, there's almost no changes I dislike.
Okay.
The only changes I dislike are silly little details, like when Holden and Miller got blasted with radiation, they didn't get an alert from their hand terminals in their pockets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's like key to that's why they knew what they were hit with. They thought they were gassed or something in the book until they looked at their terminals and saw, oh no, it's radiation, and oh, we're kind of screwed.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, little tiny details like that.
Gotcha.
So it's all negligible. I like this episode a lot.
What do you think, Max?
For me, it was kind of the average episode. There wasn't one of those episodes I didn't really like, but I liked it, but I had other episodes I liked a lot more.
Okay.
One thing I will say is, like, the beginning of the flashbacks with Miller and his call with Semi is something I wish we had seen in previous episode to
Okay.
explain how he got to that room.
Mhm.
We got that an episode later, and it's like I felt they could have shifted things around and have that in that episode, and it made a lot more sense.
You would have put that flashback in last week's episode as opposed to this week's episode. Because we'd seen it before, but you're just saying you would have connected it more directly to Miller showing up.
Well,
and
in that episode, it wouldn't have been a flashback. It would have been happening at that time, where he had to call with Semi about the ship with the Anubis.
Didn't he? I'm trying to remember, but I thought last week's episode started with him like on the transport to Eros.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's it would have been just a minor flashback. But yeah.
I was thinking he had that call on Eros, but yeah.
Yeah, because the flashback we saw with
that
Miller,
was on series. Yeah.
what we saw in Miller's flashback tonight, this episode, was from episode 7.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I went back and I had to find it just to make sure I wasn't crazy. Because that is always up for question.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Episode 7. Yeah.
But it's like him being there and anything with Anubis didn't really make any sense until we get that flashback this episode in the beginning.
Okay. But yeah, that did happen on series before he left series and not on Arrows. Yeah. All right. Well, I also really enjoyed this episode. I think it's definitely in my top tier of episodes for the season. It may not be number 1 either, but it's, you know, I liked a lot of things about this episode. Which
I'm thinking 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's in that top. It's definitely in the top 3. I think that's easy to say for me. All right, so let's get into some of the changes, specifically changes that we did like. Does anybody have one they want to start with? If not, I can kick it off.
Go ahead, kick it off. Because, like I said, I liked it all, except for tiny details.
I pretty much agree. Like, honestly, there isn't much I didn't like either. So the one thing that I wanted to talk about first was just because it's a really huge decision they made, was to have that whole sort of beginning chunk of the episode where we're mostly catching up with everything that's happened with Julie. You know, so, and then, there's some Miller flashbacks thrown in there as well that tie into it. But they took basically a third of the episode to show us all of that at that point in time. Now, I like this decision. I'm putting it here, this, things that I did like. But I would say that's far and away the most significant decision they made that was a change in this episode.
To put it in context, though, we can't forget this was a 2-part episode when it aired. Mm-hmm. So it aired over the course of 2 television hours. So
right. Yeah, so it's not as
third of the episode really for that night boiled down to a 1/6 of the episode. So it wasn't nearly as much of what you were watching.
That's fair. But they still took a significant amount of time to do all of that. And I think it accomplished quite a lot. I mean, to me, I remember watching this when I had first seen the show before I'd read the book. And I was really glad to get those scenes because I'd basically been wanting more information on Julie since the first episode. We see her at the very beginning. We barely know what's going on at all. And there's just all these gaps that need to be filled in. And so we all of a sudden got a lot of gaps filled in. And I like that. And it was, I thought it was interesting. And some parts of it are, I think, hard to really understand what they're doing, except in hindsight. But I do think there was purpose to it. So like the thing in particular that seems odd is Miller. They bother to show us Miller seeing the bird again. And then they show Julie sort of right before she dies, she seems to see a vision of Miller and the bird, and he's holding the necklace. So it links the two of them together by doing those things. And I think in the context of just this episode and everything we've seen so far, that's weird. I don't, it's not explained. I think it makes sense later, but I don't think it makes much sense now, but that's okay.
To that event, or that instance of her seeing Miller and the bird, I kind of go back to my idea that I had earlier this season that somehow Miller actually was seeing Julie just the same way somebody else ends up seeing Miller. And that, I don't know, I'm wondering, is that connected? But it leaves open the problem is the protomolecule prescient? Does it know that Miller is coming? Because it's showing her a vision, not an exact, vision, but, a vision of what's going to be happening. The next person to come into that room is literally going to be Miller.
Yeah, but he won't look like he did in that moment, because in that vision he's wearing the hat. The bird is there. It's a vision of him on series, essentially.
Right. But is she even really dead?
Well, Yeah, good question. Whatever.
Well,
but
that you bring that up is that we're seeing that scene in her perspective, and she's hearing them enter the room.
It seems like that.
Yeah.
Heavily implied in the show.
I suspect that's when she sees him with the hat and the bird, that might literally be him on series at that moment.
Because
that she's seeing, and then it's later. I mean, it looks like it happens right.
Weird. There was something else weird when she's in the room sick and she's got the television on. We've got a feed of Anderson Dawes confronting the OPA thugs at the docks who were beating up the Martian and refusing to top off their water. He's sitting there telling them to get water. Miller was there during that scene a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
How is that scene on her television screen? That doesn't make sense that they would have been broadcasting that from the docks. Just happened to be at the same time Miller's there. So something is giving her visions. And the more I think about it, I can't help but wonder, is the protomolecule, spoiler for that word, is the protomolecule prescient?
Protomolecule is in
it is in the episode. It does get said. Is it prescient? We already know it's got some sort of awareness to it.
So I think that there is a sort of answer more directly to this question of this connection between Julie and Miller. I don't think it's super spelled out in the show, but I have listened to podcast episodes where Frank talked about it.
Okay.
I don't want to explain it right now.
Okay.
It's actually probably anybody who's watching this, it doesn't matter, but it is technically a pretty big spoiler for season 2 if I explain it. So yeah, basically, in vague-ish terms, there's something later that sort of connects back to this, and so something that's creating this link that's sort of backwards and forwards in time. So
time is sort of
there's
a mutable factor.
Timing.
So that was something I was thinking about regarding that, is that it exists in both at the same time.
Yeah.
I was going to mention the TV screen with Dawes.
Yeah.
I took that as when Julie's ship, when she took the shuttle to the station, when she landed, that's when she was seeing that broadcast for whatever reason, showing that, timeline-wise, she's on that station while he's on Eros.
Yeah, that seems like a weird thing to have had broadcast. I don't know.
Well, I don't think there's anything to say that it was being broadcast live, though, was it?
Don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, because it could have been recorded and shown later.
Yeah. Like I said, I just took it as this is showing that her story was happening in parallel.
Right.
Because we didn't we kind of get a scene of she saw the new captain on the other ship?
Well, she was on the Anubis when the can got blown up by it.
Yeah.
I mean, she heard the missiles launch.
Yeah.
Torpedoes.
And then in the beginning of it, it said 7 weeks earlier. So I mean, we don't know all the breakdown of how long she was on the Anubis and all that, but it gives us some sense.
Available. I'm sure they've worked it out on the wiki.
I'm sure.
I do reference that wiki every week as I'm watching. I go back and forth.
We did get an answer to last week's episode of whether those soldiers escaped or if they were turned into the engine.
Yeah.
Whether that's happened in the book is a different matter, but
that's what I thought.
Lady caught the bug.
Yeah. I don't. That part, how it gets into that ship, we don't really know that. Yeah, I don't think.
I got two other questions while I'm thinking about them. Again, doing the first one now. Why would Frank DeGraaf have had top secret data about these stealth ships that were manufactured at Bush Naval Yards on storage in his office when he was just the ambassador to Mars?
I don't know.
That just
He's working for corporate interests. Come on.
It's not so much a change I dislike, but when you think about it, there is a bit of a plot hole.
Yeah, it's not the most. I mean,
and the other one is one that I'll admit, I found out, or brought to my attention, I should say, by the Expanse wiki, and there was just weirdness about the whole plot of the Scopuli planning to attack and board the Anubis and steal from them. If the Scopuli had never decided to do that, who is the Anubis going to use as bait to get the can?
So I mean, would they have just picked up any random ship? They might have. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Everything seemed so perfectly planned.
I think so, but did it have to be the Scopuli? I don't really see why it had to be the Scopuli. I think it could have been any ship, maybe. But
do you think it was just the Cant because they were the closest, or do you think they were?
No, well, that is a good question, because they specifically mentioned the Cant, but the only thing I could say that would seem deliberate about the Cant is that they were working for. Were they not working for an Earth? Isn't that like an Earth corporation, right?
It's an Earth corporation, yes.
So I would assume that they would want a ship that was tied to Earth, because they're trying to create problems between Earth and Mars, and they're basically going to like frame Mars and blow up something that belongs to Earth.
Right.
So but to me, I don't see any other reason why it would be a random, like it's a water hauler. Like nothing about it mattered.
Part of why I want to say the Scopuli was targeted. Go ahead, Max.
Well, you mentioned the ambassador being from Mars. The stealth technology, I believe they said, has origins from Mars, even though it was built by Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your connection to how they got the stealth technology, is they stole it through the ambassador route.
Yeah.
As far as a ship, if you go by what the show is saying, they were literally just the ones closest by the ship.
Yeah.
They wanted to create this tension. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That scientist lady was had really easy time recognizing Julie with her bent over backwards over a guy's arm, her hair hanging all over the place, and her face in a contorted and fright.
I mean, the only thing I would say is they had to know. Well, yes, I would say at a minimum, they had to know. They had to have had a lot of files on Julie, but that makes sense because of who she is, right? She is the head guy's daughter, and she is part of the OPA now. So they should know about her. It would be important to know about her. But you could be right. They could have gotten information to them specifically because they wanted, but like, why would you want Julie there? That's the only thing, right? Like, that part doesn't really make any sense. She is a complication, as she says. So like, I'm not really sure why you would want Julie there as part of this.
Yeah, that's the thing. I just
like, because if you wanted her there, there's other things you could do with her besides just like throw her in a closet. You know what I mean? So I don't think they wanted her there. I think she was a complication, and I think that they recognized her because, of course, they knew about her, given who she is. That would make sense to know about her. And I think that if it hadn't been the Scopuli, it could have been any other ship. Any other ship would have worked as well. I mean,
she knew who Julie was on site because before even boarding, she knew Julie was on board. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that they would have known everything they could possibly know about what Julie was up to. Because of who she is.
So they probably would have known when they sprung their trap that was the Scopuli and Julie was a crew member, was the pilot.
Sure.
It's the only thing, I don't know, I don't dislike any of those changes. It's just when you think about them too much, as happens with almost every science fiction show, things start falling apart.
I mean,
or maybe not falling apart, but
I don't think they fall apart. It's just
that to see some frayed edges.
They didn't connect all the dots of these things. I agree about why did Frank have that particular piece of data? Like, know why he has that. I mean, what Max said is possible. They just didn't connect those dots, so who knows? And it's not like it's obvious why she would find it there. Or I mean, I think she was just looking for anything, right, that might be interesting, right? Like she grabbed them because she didn't know what was going to be on there. But
she's so skeevy.
So
I love her.
I know.
she
I
is
did have
sketchy as hell.
I do have one here. In the books, was Julie's father involved with Protomolecule? Because I don't think he was.
He was.
He was?
Yeah, he was.
Okay.
I know that much.
The one thing I don't remember 100% is, okay, so in this episode, Dresden has that message to him, and he's making it clear, like, Jules-Pierre Mao is the one to make the call as to what they do on Arrows. I don't recall from the books whether he would have been the one who would make that decision. I'm not saying he wasn't. I just don't recall that one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that could have been a change where they made it his call to go to phase 3 on Arrows. I just don't remember. But he absolutely was involved. Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't remember from the book if he was or not, just that it didn't seem like he was
You don't find out much about it in Leviathan Wakes.
You don't know that in Leviathan Wakes.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't know that. Yeah.
That's where I was going, like in the first book.
But it wasn't a change in that sense. Like they didn't add that or make that up.
Before reading the first book. So I went into Leviathan Wakes already knowing this.
Some of that.
There'll be a big old spoiler section on top of this.
So I knew about that from the show, but I wasn't sure if that was a change from the book because the first book didn't say that. That's where I was asking.
You definitely you're knowing some of that stuff ahead of time. Like it, Yeah. The only thing I don't recall specifically is whether he would have been the one specifically to make that decision or whether he would have made it unilaterally, but he absolutely was involved. So, and it could have been him. I just don't remember.
A possible another change is I don't know if they really did the whole psychotic soldier thing in this episode.
Oh, I mean, these are just bugs. Well, these are guys that are conditioned to be crazy.
Oh no, I don't think that's in this episode. I know what you're talking about, and I don't. That's from.
I don't even think we see that in season 1.
That's season
because they're supposed
to
be on the station, aren't they?
Not that station.
No, basically,
I thought they were leading the the doctor away. Like they had the special units on the station.
In the book,
and the thugs.
In the book, I don't remember seeing a single scientist on Arrows. We only see Dresden here because they need to introduce Dresden.
Yeah.
Do the exposition and reveal
that's a
reveal.
So in the book there was a section.
In
the book there was a section about they had these special soldiers there. Beyond the thugs escorting people in and out.
Yeah, they did. I don't remember them having any scientists with them, but I do remember like the private security, I'm assuming thugs.
Yeah.
That weren't CPM. The CPM was, other than like people who had already been there and just transferred into CPM, like Semi. CPM was all the Griga back from Arrows or series.
All the thugs, yeah. Yeah.
Like a whole bunch of different groups.
I seem to recall there was something about that in the book on that station, talking about their conditioning.
Not in this section of it. I don't know if there was in later, but I
know the other station they definitely talked about it.
Yeah, I think it happens in season 2. I don't think that comes up in season 1. So if there was anything like that in this part of the book, they just saved it for later. I don't remember it being on Arrows though. Not explained in any way. If there were, it might have just been like a thing you'd have to figure out in hindsight. I don't think it's explained.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Because for the most part, very little is explained when they're on Arrows. Like they overhear some stuff, but like you said, the Dresden part that's added. And we didn't. And even in this episode, what we're seeing of Dresden, they're not seeing of Dresden. They don't know all those things. And because the book stays in Miller's and Holden's POVs, that's the one thing that's, again, a really big change overall is that we get so many different perspectives on what's happening in this episode that we didn't get in the book because we're staying so tight with those two POVs. So, I mean, I like that.
I wonder if that's how they wrote it. Like one of them wrote one character's POVs and another wrote all the other characters.
I don't know.
POVs.
Yeah.
And then when they added new, they split those up between them.
I think to some extent that is probably what they do, because I think they get more comfortable with writing. Like I think, for instance, that Ty Frank has talked about how he writes Amos. So anyway, at least in the show, so because there's not as much Amos POV in the books, but okay. The other thing is anybody else wanted to say anything about any changes that we particularly liked? Anything else you really wanted to applaud?
My favorite stuff is probably the Julie stuff. You know, I really enjoyed seeing her act, first of all, instead of just bitching at her dad on a vid screen, or yelling at people at a protest. That's really all we ever got to see her do. And now we're getting to see, something out of her, and not just in a dark closet, floating around with barely any light.
Yeah, this was her most significant episode for sure.
And I'm glad she got the work.
Max, anything else you wanted to add on things that you liked for changes? Okay. Oh, Max, I think you're muted.
Sorry, that pretty much catches them all.
Okay. So I'm just going to say, again, I don't really have much that I didn't like. We've kind of covered some questions we had. I have this one minor thing that I didn't like connected to Julie. This is a bit nitpicky, but there's a part where she's already on Eros, and it starts with a voiceover. She's talking about how she was trying to lay low and blah blah blah. She had to get off the streets. It's all in voiceover, and that whole part with the voiceover bugged me because it's just not a show that uses that kind of technique. And I mean, I don't love it as a technique just universally. I mean, sometimes it works, but in this particular case, it stood out because they don't use it as a technique, and it just seemed odd.
They should have been using it with Miller this entire time.
Yeah, I don't know. My thought was that what they should have done with that whole section with Julie is, in the book, there's a part where after they find her, they have her hand terminal, and they get into it and they find some notes that she made, and so that gives a little sequence of events of what was happening to her because she was making these notes. I'm assuming it was like a voice note where she just talks to it and it records. So I don't understand why they didn't just do that in the show.
That would be telling, not showing. And
no, but that's what voiceover is, telling, not showing.
Usually, yes, but relying too heavily on it in that way, with the way they did it here, is they did it while showing you a montage of the things she's going through. I mean, so they were able to do two things at once. You're getting the exposition of what she did in one point of view via her voice, and then you were getting visual of that and other things she did. So
I'm not saying I would still do some of the visuals. You could still do some of those scenes and you could have no voiceover. You could still show all those things. And I'm not saying you wouldn't even necessarily need an extensive amount of those notes. But I think for the things that you wanted to fill in that you couldn't just show, I would have had her doing a note on her phone. It's still her talking, but you understand the context.
I think it would be it's more impactful if while you're hearing her, you're seeing something other than the crew sitting around looking at a hand terminal, listening to it.
I don't know. It just takes me out when you randomly, you never use that device in the whole show.
Right.
No one has a voiceover. And all of a sudden, in this 1 or 2 minute sequence, you all of a sudden have this character doing a voiceover, and it's weird.
The whole episode's structure and pacing is weird compared to previous episodes, especially with those flashbacks. This episode really out there when it comes to the rest of the Expanse episodes so far. I understand. I fully understand. And yeah, I was taken out of it a little bit too.
If they'd even done it in the whole Julie sequence, if the entire Julie sequence, the entire flashback had voiceover, it might have bothered me less but they only did it in that one bit. Everything else, they didn't do it.
It does feel. Go ahead, Max.
It feels weird.
So, this kind of reminds me of the situation with episode 7 of Wheel Time. I felt like the end with the flashback felt cheap.
Okay.
Kind of revealing events that happened in the first episode that we don't find out except through flashback. And like I said, I kind of wish they would have shown these flashbacks earlier in this season. Just even if it's a cold open of Julie doing her stuff on the ship as the story progresses.
Yeah,
kind of like they do in the book.
I wouldn't have minded having like little snippets of Julie throughout the whole thing. I don't know what that would have done. That might have been interesting.
I think
I could see issues with like her name dropping Anubis before they find Anubis. But then if she names drop Anubis on episode 5 and all of a sudden we get episode 7 or Anubis, like, oh shit, I know that shit.
They'd have to be careful with how they did it, and there's some chance it would be hard for people to follow that thread. But it could have been interesting. I'm not opposed to that idea.
Yeah. And see, I like being able to follow a thread versus being, just thrown in your face a flashback of this is how it actually happened.
Yeah.
See,
I mean, you can do it well and you can do it crappy, and this is middle of the road for me.
Yeah. I kind of wish they'd gone with voiceover from the get-go with Miller's character. Yeah, that's tropey, but that's kind of how Detective Gumshoe stories told, and it's like a shorthand to put the listener, the viewer, into that mindset.
We need a voiceover for Amos, no one else.
Oh God, there's one show that I think
no voiceover.
It's just silence.
The best use of voiceover ever, hands down, is Lena Headey in Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Which is a much better show than it had any right to be. I was actually rather floored when I watched that the first time. I was like, this shouldn't be good, but it's like freaking good.
Okay. But speaking of random like voiceovers in Sarah Connor, like I haven't seen that show, but Sarah Connor randomly has like voiceover in Terminator 2. I'm fine with that. Doesn't bother me.
I think she does voiceover throughout all the movies.
Is it? I don't remember
all the movies she's in, I should say.
Sure. I don't remember it in the first one though, but maybe it was. I just don't remember.
Might actually have been his voiceover, the dude.
No, I don't remember that at all. But whatever, it was even whether it was or it wasn't, I definitely didn't mind it in that movie. So it's not like it always bothers me, but I have to say it's a device that shouldn't be overused. And if you have an option not to use it, it's usually better not to, unless you're making it a thing, it's a feature. I personally would not have wanted to see them do constant voiceover with Miller. I don't like that idea at all. And I don't think it was necessary because we understand what's going on with Miller. Like we get him and we didn't need it. And I just think the random use of it here was weird. And I think they could have done it differently. So it was an odd choice. That's all. But I'm on the particularly anti-voiceover side of things. So there you have it.
I grew up with Magnum PI, so I had voiceovers on a lot of my stuff growing up. So I just didn't like it in Blade Runner. Not a fan of that movie.
Huh. Okay.
We have to review that at some point.
Okay. That would be interesting. So do we need to talk about changes more, or are we done with that and moving on to...
I did have one thing to feel about the Miller voiceover. Is if we did have a Miller voiceover throughout the first season, people probably would have hated his character just as much as I did in his chapters in the book.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand not liking Miller. He's a sad sack of the case, but disliking him, I don't know.
Just liked his chapters.
Yeah.
Couldn't stand reading his chapters until like the end quarter.
Yeah.
But I think if they had that same kind of thing going in the books or the show, you probably would have hated every time his character came on screen.
Possibly. It'd
be kind of like the Sansa chapters in Game of Thrones.
Oh, actually, There's some really good stuff in there, though.
We're not going to get sidetracked on Game of Thrones.
As I reread those books a bit more mature than the first time I read them, and knowing what happened later on, it started to become good writing, actually. But let's not get sidetracked on Game of Thrones.
Especially not on that. Let's just
That's a contentious series of books and a contentious TV show.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so
not one we'll be reviewing anytime soon either.
I don't think we should. No. Not now, anyway. So let's talk about scenes that stood out to us, good or bad. Start with the good.
For me, it was like all of the stuff with Julie. I mean, it was tragic as hell, but and at one point pretty gross. Well, a couple of points pretty gross. But I think those scenes make up the best parts of the episode. I mean, it's only what you said, about a third of the episode.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can't even pick one particular sequence. I mean, maybe the one in the cockpit, the bridge of the scopuli, the banter with the other belters and all that. I mean, that was pretty cool. How much they kept telling her, "You're one of us," Yeah. That was pretty cool to see her in her element.
Yeah. I mean, there was some interesting stuff in that particular scene too, which we didn't really talk about. Like, just it helps you kind of understand like how she ended up where she was in the first place, right? Like, she kind of knew her father was like messed up with something, and that gave her motivation, right, to not let go of this, because she knew he was up to no good in some fashion. Didn't understand what, but she knew it was something big and bad.
That's the second, the Julie scene as being pretty standout. Seeing her father was kind of a standout of like, oh, who's this guy?
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't think anything really stood out as much this episode until next episode.
Okay. I have a little bit of a random and odd pick for mine. But the scene in particular that I liked, I mean, I like that we started getting some of the like Miller Holden dynamic in this episode, but the scene in particular that I liked was actually before they split off. So there's the whole Rossi crew and Miller after they've left the flop house, and they're hiding in that little whatever the heck that service shack. Yes. So in there, and then basically that whole scene I just really liked. It wasn't a lot of lines, but it all just crystallized for me basically like where each of these characters is coming from in that moment, and they all have like different priorities. I mean, something really messed up has happened. They're in trouble. They have to figure out a plan. They all have different priorities, and it all was very like clearly crystallized in a relatively short scene. And each character might have had a couple of lines, but it just really worked. I liked it.
I found something weird in that scene though. The moment something didn't happen that I expected to happen.
Okay.
When Miller jumps up, grabs Holden, and slams Holden against the wall by the collar, I totally expected Amos to jump in
just
there,
kill him,
to do something. Instead, Naomi has to yell, "Amos, do something!" And Amos is over by the door saying, "The one thing we should be doing is getting out of here." I'm like,
okay, so
that sounds like Alex.
I think here's what I think on that. I mean, this is my opinion. I can see where you're coming from on that. I think Amos is always constantly assessing the biggest threat at any given moment. What is the biggest threat? And while Miller might, seem like a sort of threat because he's like physically attacking Holden, I think Amos is always keenly aware of what is a much bigger threat, and his instincts are very strong, and he knows that everything about where they are is hinky and just they need to get out of there. And so I think he is laser focused on get off this rock. I don't want to be anywhere on this rock. And also he probably, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. He probably would have reacted differently if Miller went for his gun, but like Miller, as like in terms of physicality, I don't think he's really going to do that much harm to Holden.
Probably not.
I don't know. That's just my interpretation of it. I think they were showing Amos again having that instinct for where the biggest threat is coming from.
Okay.
And he knows it's not Miller.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I hadn't looked at it that way, so yeah. I didn't have any scenes that I disliked.
No, I didn't either. I mean, like I said, I already went over the voiceover thing, so I'm not gonna go repeat anything on that. But that's the only thing in this entire episode that I wish they had done differently. Otherwise, I don't have anything that I, didn't like.
Yeah, and we already talked about how I wish they moved some of the stuff in other episodes.
Yeah.
But I didn't dislike what we saw. I just wish they moved them around.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about our actors. Who is in need of a shout out this week?
Flawless Fade as Julie Mao.
Okay. Yep.
Definitely.
Yep, she had some good stuff in there.
I think Steven Strait was pretty good as Holden this week.
Yeah.
And even though it was just like a brief line and a little bit of face work, I really like seeing Francois Chow showing up as Jules-Pierre in Mao. Mm-hmm. Especially knowing, how he is later on. And I've seen him in other stuff before too. And he's, I've always really thought he was good. So I thought it was cool seeing him show up for that brief little bit scene. Hopefully we'll get, I know we'll get more of him because I've seen it, but I liked his work.
Yeah. Max, you want to add anyone?
That pretty much covers everyone except for Shora.
Any animals or inanimate objects that were pulling their weight in this?
No. We already did the bird back in episode 5.
Okay.
But how did they do this?
It's already episode 5, so it doesn't matter in this one.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I thought the necklace did a really bad job.
That freaking necklace.
Yeah.
Okay. Jeez. Yeah. All right. Since we're calling out inanimate objects, for me, a lot of this episode was, like the Miller Holden dynamic. So I think, you got to give credit to both Steven Strait and Thomas Jane. I also think that I don't think Naomi has had a lot of time to shine this season, but I thought that Dominique Tipper had some good moments in this episode. So I wanted to call that out. And I liked the monologue that we had from, and I am having a moment.
That's fine.
Dresden?
No.
That was my guess too.
Fred Johnson.
Fred Johnson. Oh yes.
It's just some random guy's name that I can't remember. Anyway.
I forgot he was even in this episode.
Well, I know, but
one scene, but it was good.
Yeah.
I'm only just saying it because he had to do this scene. It's tough to do a scene like that. He didn't have a scene partner. It's just him doing a monologue to nothing. That's the only reason I wanted to shout that out because that's hard to do in terms of acting. You don't have a scene partner and stuff. So
can I just toss it in? Isn't that also a change from the books? Didn't he?
Isn't
that what Holden basically mentioned out? He pulled a Holden.
He is pulling a Holden. I thought about that too last night.
Holden. Yeah, he did. None of that happened in the books. Yeah. But I'm okay. Like because they're adding in the whole Avarasala plot. It ties into that. That's the reason for it. So it serves that, and I am overall, I'm in favor of that. And I'm
in favor of any excuse to give us more Chad L. Coleman.
Yeah. So and anyway, so we always like to say he does a good job, but I just he had that one random thing in this episode, but it was a tough scene that he had to do. So good for him. All right. So are we ready to talk about themes?
What are those?
In this episode, it was a little light on theme. I think you were going to say that at the beginning, Glenn. So
Yeah.
I've only got the one.
What's yours, Max?
It's basically desperation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I think that's very...
Everyone's desperate to get off those goddamn rocks.
Yes.
Protogen's desperate to get their experiment going.
Mm-hmm. And Fred Johnson is desperate enough to pull a Holden. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. But no, I definitely, that's a lot of how people are acting here is in desperation for sure.
So it was desperate to steal stuff from a dead guy.
Yeah, he doesn't need it.
Yeah,
like he's taking it to the afterlife with him.
Yeah. Okay. For me, I think mine is just kind of another way of looking at a similar thing. I felt like what this episode showed us was like the different ways that people react when society starts to break down, like social order. Okay. So like, I think that's kind of what we were seeing in this episode is just like the breakdown of social order. Because, the episode's just sort of getting like more and more chaotic. And you have different people reacting in different ways. And one of those things is that like you make different moral calculations, or a lot of people make different moral calculations in a situation like that they would make at other times. I think we saw that from Holden because he reacts pretty differently to Miller, who is going like nuts, than he did to Amos, a couple episodes ago, right? So, he was like laying the line down with Amos, but he's just kind of rolling with Miller.
You guys remember when Miller was getting ready to go shoot Dresden?
Yeah.
Holden literally jumped Miller, and they wrestled, and that's how they ended up getting caught by the guards because they were fighting on the ground. He literally dove and grabbed that gun arm.
Sure, but I'm just saying. I'm not saying he's not like making any like restrictions on Miller. I think he is trying to rein him in a little bit, but it was the moment when Miller shoots that thug. I don't know if he shot him like in the gut or something, but like, and Holden's just like Miller, but then it just rolls with it. It's like you just, I don't know. Again, I'm not saying
you don't have time to do much else.
Yeah, I'm not saying Holden has dropped all his morals or that he's not trying to rein in Miller at all. It's just a slightly different calculation that's being made. For starters, the fact that he's even teaming up with Miller in the first place is a different moral calculation or a different level of risk-taking calculation, maybe. It's not moral at that point.
It makes sense. To me, it makes sense.
I get it. I'm not trying to argue that anything he's doing doesn't make sense here. I'm just arguing that I think that you see people react a little bit differently from each other and react a little bit differently from themselves under like more normal social structure circumstances than when social order starts to break down. People make different calculations. That's all. I don't know. It's not, no judgment.
Yeah.
I do have one thing to add on that.
Yeah.
Is that I'm pretty sure they mentioned in this episode about splitting up. And I mentioned D&D before, and you never split the party because shit hits the fan.
And who told them not to do it? Naomi. Naomi told them not to do it. Naomi is always right. You should not ignore her.
Never split the party.
Yeah,
she's right off.
Bad idea.
Horror movie 101. Come on.
Yes.
I do wonder if she should be the captain, though.
Oh, I think that's, well, it's more so acknowledged in the book. And then she's just like, I don't want that job. It sucks. But what else? She says something else too about how like, she doesn't like to make decisions with like minimal information and like
when they went to change the transponder in the book, she didn't want to hit the button because she was worried it might just make them blow.
Right.
Holden's
just like
on the show. It was the exact opposite. Holden didn't want to do it. So she pushed the button.
Right. And in terms of their characters, Holden is much more of a risk taker than she is.
See, I think she'd rather be able to one say you were wrong, I was right.
Yes.
But she can't do that in the captain chair as easily.
Yeah, don't split the party. Anyway, we got sidetracked. That was my main thing on theme. So what do you have for us, Glenn?
My big one was things not being exactly what they seem to be. But at the same time, there are certain other things that are way too spot on.
Okay.
Things that weren't what they seem to be is, for instance, the CPM and the other security on Eros. They weren't really cops; they were gangsters.
Yeah.
Alex, you would think Alex would be kind of a tough guy, being former Navy, 20 years in U.S., MCRN. He's not the tough guy. He's the one who's like freaking out the most. He's the one
in the book. He literally throws up in the bathroom.
Yeah, he's in the head puking.
They cut him a break in the show and didn't make him look quite so.
But you would expect the 20-year Navy vet to be a bit more of a tough guy than Alex Kamal is.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The whole emergency crisis on Eros, it was portrayed to be either an undetermined explosion in the book, but a ship exploding in the docks on the show.
Some plausible reason why there might be radiation,
but
whatever.
It wasn't really, it was all just, as we know, a ruse for a science experiment. Scopuli crew thought the Anubis was just a light freighter. Oops. No, it's not. That's a gunboat. Another thing that wasn't what it seemed to be. The Protogen security guys from the Anubis that captured the Scopuli, the thugs seemed to think Julie was just another belter, the way he was talking to her. And it was only the scientist who recognized her. So another thing that wasn't what it appeared to be to the people perceiving it. Christian Avarasala's need to say goodbye was really just a ruse, an excuse to get her in Frank's office.
Get some data sticks.
Yep. Fred Johnson throughout the show comes off as this really confident guy with nerves of steel. That's not what we saw as he was getting ready to make his broadcast. He was nervous, not so sure of himself seeming. He did not come across as the Fred Johnson we normally get, of sheer, pure confidence, knowing exactly what he's doing. And then radiation shelters, not being shelters, but the way I wrote it in my notes, radiation ovens.
Yeah.
So they're the opposite of what you would expect. Now, the things that are too spot on, we've discussed this in a previous episode, the name of Scopuli. It's from Serenum Scopuli, where the rocks which the sirens lived and lured sailors to their death with their song in Greek mythology. Fitting name for that ship, the purpose it served.
Yes.
The ship that caught it and then killed the ant was Anubis, god of death. Another kind of spot on name.
That one, at least, they might have named on purpose.
And we know for a fact this one was named on purpose in the show, but the Rocinante is spot on because they're no longer workhorses. They don't work for the corporations lugging junk back and forth. Yeah, they might allow themselves to get hired by the OPA for like individual jobs, but they're not part of a corporate cog. So I think the Rocinante really does fit as a descriptor for the entire crew. There was not so much seen in this episode, but we picked it up in previous episodes. They've hinted at the dangers of radiation, and now we get to see radiation playing out.
Next episode.
Yeah, coming up after this, but we've seen them get hit by it. Not so much this episode, but previous episodes has been a theme, but it's one that's important to upcoming episodes. So, and that was pretty much all I found was deception, and then the opposite of deception being too spot on with what your name. So
yeah. Okay.
The only other thing is, I mean, you could say Eros is spot on name because that's where Miller found the woman he loves. They chose Eros as the location for that. Don't know if that's why they picked that particular asteroid. I mean, there are other large asteroids they could have picked to set that scene at. And I'm pretty sure there was a lot of brothels on Eros.
I'm sure there were. Yes. I can see all that. I mean, I think kind of ties into what I was talking about before of like, where is the real threat coming from? Like you might think certain things are threats, and then turns out other things are the real threats behind that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think I was too caught up with the adrenaline of the story to really actually think about despair. So I wasn't going on the negative, that negative of a theme. That's why I didn't pick up on that one. But I noticed, as I showed, a bunch of deceptive appearances that turned out not to be the truth. So that was the only one I really noticed.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an episode that, is certainly a lot focused on plot. But again, the thing that I think I liked most about this episode was, I'm looking at it through the lens of like, okay, things are starting to break down, things are starting to get more chaotic. But what was always clear to me is what each character was like focused on, what their perspective was in the scene, like those things, even little side characters like Sematimba, like everyone, like whenever they had any focus or were on screen, on camera, I knew what all the characters were, what their intentions were, what their focus were, what their perspective was. And so that's where it's a really well done episode, because you're creating that sense of chaos and social order breaking down, but you're not making the experience of watching it feel chaotic. Like you can follow and you can see all these different perspectives on what's happening. And so that's why I like this episode especially.
You mentioned somebody that I totally forgot to give a shout out to, but Kevin Hanchard, who plays Sematimba.
Yeah.
That was great. You guys always good.
He's really good, actually. Really good.
I finally remembered the name he played, the character he plays on Orphan Black. It's Art Bell. Okay. And then there's that AM talk show, like late at night, Coast to Coast AM or something like that. And they talk about crazy, weird stuff like alien abductions and just weird stuff. And so it's kind of fitting that Art Bell is the detective on a show about clones, which is inherently weird when you start encountering the clones.
So you're right about him though. He like I felt like he did a really like he had not a lot of stuff in this episode, but like he had some like the acting that he was doing in those little moments that he had was just crystal clear, spot on. He was very good.
So Glenn, talking about stuff on the nose.
Yeah.
They found the protomolecule basically on Phoebe, right? Or at least
that's where they were. Yes, right. That's right.
That's where they were experimenting with it. I don't remember.
No, it was found there. You're right.
It was found buried in Phoebe?
Somewhere in Saturn and moons and all that stuff. But,
yes.
The ancient Greek goddess Phoebe means pure and bright. Alder means prophet. And she is the grandmother of, Apollo, Artemis, and the witchcraft goddess Hecate.
Hecate. Interesting. All right. Yeah,
there's some stuff there.
Okay. Huh.
Today's episode was pretty obvious too. I mean,
critical mass.
Or actually, Julie's body has achieved critical mass of the protomolecule,
and they are looking for, Eros is serving as critical mass for the protomolecule.
For that for the full, experiment.
Yeah.
So it kind of
pretty disturbing. The ending of this episode is like swear words.
Yeah. And they did do a nod in the episode towards the protomolecule's description in the books. When she coughs into her hand,
it's brown and gooey.
It looks like the way it's described in the book.
Yeah, that was gross.
Dresden mentions, it's not airborne. Just don't let anything goopy touch you.
And don't let anything wet.
That was an important piece of information. We got that from Julie in her notes in the book. But yes, that was important to get.
We also learned that it likes radiation.
Yep.
Which is important in the plot in season 2 and 3, as far as I remember.
It's kind of always important, yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else we wanted to bring up this episode?
I don't think so.
We knocked another one out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys for joining me with this. Thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe, leave us a like and some comments. And don't forget to be awesome.